Okay, so this is just going to be hopefully a quick video on how a computer science 40S student could incorporate something like a linked list quickly into any type of project. So I'm going to start by just making a project. Imagine it's a final project for a computer science 40S student. So something simple like this. Okay, so it doesn't matter what your project is, whether it's a game or an app or whatever. So I'm just going to quickly add something using the NetBeans Visual Designer, a new JFrame form. That this is, say, my project user interface, and I'm just going to just add something that just says project was here. So whatever I made, that's what my project would be. It'd be some project that would go here, and that's just going to be sitting on that particular form or that particular design. Now remember, when you use the NetBeans Designer, it to your code automatically adds a version of main, which you can keep if you want, or like I'm going to do, I'm going to delete that version of main. So now that my project only has one version of main, save that, and notice it now only has one little green triangle. And now I'm going to go to that one and just bring up that project UI. So project UI, project UI equals new, project UI. Let's put a lowercase p on this one. Run my program, and I should just see that user interface appear. And obviously, if you're doing a final project, that's where you'd be spending the majority of your time. Now, I am missing one thing. I just realized that I have to add the good old make this user interface visible. And you should know how to do this from various other things in the course. So anyways, there we go. There's my, imagine my project, whatever it is. Okay, so now that wasn't what I wanted to show you. What I wanted to show you was, I'm going to add a sort of first opening screen to this, where the user can enter some information. So I'm going to add a second JFrame as the opening user interface. And so imagine with this one that I first welcome them to the program. So, and again, I'm going to keep this design really simple so it's really fast, but something like welcome to the final project, whatever it would be called, right? Some kind of game or something like that. Okay, and then I'll have them enter their name. And I could do other things. I could do passwords, or if it was a game, maybe it, in the end, it keeps track of their final score in the game or something like that. But I'm just going to let them enter their name here. I'll put a little text field where they can put in their name. Or if they, and then that would maybe have a button to add a new user. So if they're a new user, they would click this and add themselves as a new user. Or maybe I'll have a list of users who have done this before. So I'm going to use a list for that. And one thing I would suggest about lists is, yes, there's a list in the swing controls, but there's a much easier one to use in the AWT controls here, just to speed up our timeline. So I'm going to add that list box there. And we'll just add a quick label. Current users. Down here. Be a new user. So new users enter their name and they add themselves. And otherwise, if they're an existing user, they can select themselves from the list box below. Okay? So something very simple like this, right? And actually, I'm going to make this appear just so I can kind of see how it would look. And I'm just going to do that by swapping this main here from project UI to now the opening UI. Very simple way just change the starting user interface here from one to the other. Okay, hit start. Oh, and I once again forgot opening UI. I do have to add that one line of code to make it visible. Okay, and like I did before, I'm also going to delete this version of main just to keep it clean. Okay, so this is now my opening UI. I know it's not that pretty, but it's got the idea. You can enter a name, add the new user, or select the existing user if there was some there. Okay? If you were doing something this Refine project, I wanted to, again, show you how simple and clean it could be. You don't necessarily have to have all of this either. But I'm just showing you this as this could be added to literally any project. It just keeps like a username, and you could add passwords and stuff like that. Okay? Now, I'm going to get into the code for add new user. Clicking the button. Okay. And rather than write the code right here, I'm going to divert it to a method that I'm going to create called add new user. And then similarly, I'm going to do the same thing here. And divert that to a method. They're down here. Okay. And one of the things, like when you go to clean this up beforehand, and obviously you're going to be, adding in your comments, whatever descriptions and stuff you put in there, and all that stuff, all that good stuff. Don't forget about your comments. One thing that I might suggest is any code that the designer writes for you, all this stuff that will appear in gray, I don't need to see any of that. Just like I don't need to see this generated code here, I don't really need to see any of that stuff. And as you're working on this, it may be useful for you to kind of hide that stuff as well. One quick way to do this is the way that NetBeans does this, how it quickly hides away generated code, is it uses this little comment tag here, editor fold thing. You can actually place a copy of that in your own code, and you have to include one at the start of where it begins, and then there's one way down here at the end of where it ends. If you want, you could do that, right? Like I could put that right here. And there, it just hides all that code. So that's a way you could do that if you wanted to. So just throwing that out there, that for those of you using those editors, that is a thing you can do, is steal that little comment type tag thing from NetBeans itself. And I'm just going to do that just so that as you guys look at what I'm about to write, it keeps the code much simpler and cleaner looking, right? So we have our original project, we have the user interface and the opening user interface. And really, we don't have to work on these anymore, right? This is just an example of that. It's an example of a sample project, CS40S final project. That's all this is. And I'm not sure, oh, it must have just been whatever. And for this, this is the main user interface for whatever a student would make. Okay, that's all that is. That's done. So this is the one we're going to focus on, right? So that's the project UI. This is the opening UI. And an opening screen to demonstrate CS40S concepts. Okay, so there we go. We're ready to do the stuff we need to do. Now, whether we're adding a new user or adding an existing user, we are eventually going to go over to the main program. So I'm going to steal this line of code that we did back at the beginning, add it in here and here. So whether we're adding a new user or an existing user, either way, we're then going to move on to the next form, whatever that is. We then also would get rid of our current user interface, this dot dispose. We would get rid of that user interface. Okay, so we start with this one, and we move to the next one, and you notice this one is behind it is no longer there. Very basic, very much what you would expect to do in program projects like that. What now is going to be the interesting part is I'm going to add in something from the collections unit, the linked list. So first thing I'm going to need to do, though, is I need that code. I need the 40S code. So I'm going to go to our current in-class example, because at this point in the course, I would have completed that part of it. So I'm going to go to our current in-class example, and I'm just going to download the whole example. Now, most of you won't need to do this because you'll have the 40S example already done. But here I am. I'm going to put it out on the desktop for now. I'm then going to open that in NetBeans from the desktop. There it is. And here's the neat part. I'm just going to grab this entire package called collections. I'm going to copy it. Now I can even literally drag it over to final project. Now that'll break some stuff in this one, but who cares? I'm not dealing with that anymore. I'll just keep that one around in case there's something else I want to pilfer out of that later. But now I have the entire linked list and node class as part of my 40S project. Now there might be other stuff. Maybe I don't need anything from the advanced classes unit, but maybe some of the stuff from recursion, those tools, like a calculator, maybe that would be useful. So I could also theoretically drag and drop that in there as well. Then maybe I think, okay, I'm done with this 40S. I don't think there's anything else I need there. Now, I'm going to delete it now. So now I can just focus on this new final project that I'm working on, and I have all these tools at my disposal. Now remember, you could tap into more resources by going to our assignments page, our final project page, and these example projects, which has even more potential resources, including this one, which I'm about to put up there when I'm done this video, on there for you. So anyways, now that I'm ready to go, I'm going to create in this opening UI a linked list, okay? And here I got to be careful, because if I just use autocomplete, it's going to import the one that's part of the Java library. And I want to use the one that's over here, the one that we wrote. So I'm going to say linked list. And now when I import it, I got to make sure that I import it from collections. So it's importing from my collections, so it's using the one there. And it's going to store just a bunch of strings in this example of all the users. Okay? So a linked list of all the users equals a new linked list. And in the collections unit, although in some cases we rush that unit because it's the last unit, you should know how to kind of do this based on that, working with that unit. Okay, so now let's add a new user. This should be pretty easy. Let's pull in the name of that user by going to the J text field 1. I didn't bother naming it. Dot get the text out of it. Again, as a 40S student, get text as a accessor method is something you should know about. Now I can go to users and just add that name to the linked list. It's that simple. I'm also going to take a second to add it to this this list box, even though I'm disposing of it. For now, list 1, and this is also why I picked that one, also is a very simple add method. So I'm going to just take a second to comment these 2 lines out just to test that, just to make sure that works. So if I put a name in here and add that as a new user, it adds it to the list box and it's adding it to my linked list. And every time I do this, it would be adding it in there. Okay? So that works. We'll bring this back to life. Like that. Pretty simple. Okay? So now, in theory, if I was adding an existing user, okay, then the users would have already existed. There'd already be a bunch of users in this linked list. So what I would do is, what I would normally do is I would loop through the users dot, instead of with linked list, instead of dot length, it's dot size. I would pull in a name by going into users and getting what's at spot I. Once I have that name, I would do the exact same thing. I would add it to my list box. Okay. Now that's assuming there's already users in the list, which there isn't. But if it was, that would be the case that would happen there, right? It would go through that. Because the size is 0, there's no loop to do here, right? So what if we just change something slightly? What if here we made a little startup method when the program first starts, create method startup. But if in addition to doing that, I took a second to actually put a few users in there, just for testing purposes. Users.add Dave. So I'm going to add a Dave to the user list. I'll add 3, Dave, Sarah, and John. I'm going to add those 3 users. So in theory, those would already exist. And when I start this, okay, I'll run this code at startup. Or actually, no, I'll just do it this way. You saw, but maybe I'll remove this real quick. There it went through the linked list and put them in there, right? Really quick. Now I've put in, hang on, let me comment this out as well here. So just to show you kind of where we're at here. There's Dave, Sarah, and John. Adding another new user. Adding another new user. And I do this, it just keeps going through the list and adding them all in there. But it's working, it's adding them in there. Maybe I'll add a little feature, list one dot remove all. So I'll clear it out first, right? That way it's not just continually adding. So I'll add them all in there. Add the new user. Add the new user. And it just adds them all in there again. Okay, so it's kind of working the way we would like. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, you now see how easy that was to incorporate collections, very much like arrays. I'm going to go one step beyond this. What if, now to make this actually part of your, say, final project, you wanted to be able to save that list to a file so that every time the program shuts down, the list is saved, and then every time the program starts up again, the list is essentially read back in. So file saving isn't something we had time to do in the 40S course, but it is still an example of the content you could learn in this course. It goes beyond. So, and there are examples of it. So you may not want to learn all of it right now, but you just need enough to get sort of this part of your project working. So if I go to examples and I scroll down, right, beyond collections, there's some programming extras, okay? Or if I go through content, and I scroll down, beyond collections, there's extra content. And in that extra content, there's some stuff about saving and opening data from files. And I could go there and I could look through lectures or examples and stuff like that. There's definitely ways I can do that, okay? So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna tap into a little bit of that just to get enough. So I'm just going to go into that and just look for a little bit. I'm not going to read all of this right now. I'm not going to teach you a lesson on this. But I'm going to imagine as a student, maybe you wanted that. And so I'm going to go into just enough of this to get some code that will be workable here, right? Here's some saving code. saving text to a file name. That's close. It's not quite what we want. Then there's opening, which is again close, but not quite what we want. If I was to keep going, this is the idea. I'm going to save something a little more powerful to a file. And that's the piece of code I want right there. I'm going to save an object. In this case, the object will be a linked list to a file name. Good enough. That's all I need, right? So I would need essentially this piece of code right here. Save this object to a file. Perfect. And now, if I think about it, that should be probably in this example right here, which allows me to copy and paste, right? So I'm going to find save object. That was the name of it. There it is. I'm going to literally take this little method over to here, pop it in. Ooh, okay, let's try that again. Copy. Paste. Okay, sometimes this happens with my NetBeans. I just got to restart it. Here we go. And paste. There we go. Whoa, that didn't go in well, but let's just Shift F, reformat it. All good. Okay, got to do some imports here. Import, import. Okay. Now this uses a generic piece of data. So again, as a 40S student, you should kind of remember a little bit how that essentially would work. So I'm including generics as part of this method. I'm saving some generic thing. Now, just to go back to that example, open an object would be very also part of that. So I'm going to find that. And incorporate that into this. So this isn't really learning this. This is just me quickly incorporating this as part of the final project. Okay, doing the required imports. In that code. That's okay. Fix it really quickly. Okay, so there's those two methods in there. So, save object, open object. Let me just pause for a second. Video's back now and recording. To pause there for a second. And now we have all this code in there for saving and opening objects. And hopefully, it's literally that simple. So let's now bring this all together, hopefully together. So now what I'm going to do is for startup, I'm going to move this code to startup. Get rid of that. Okay. When the program starts up, it would first, now it's maybe time to add a few comments to the code, load all the data from the permanent how to spell that file into the list. Okay, so our users equals, so here's where we're going to bring in this open object thing, but we have to do a cast as a linked list of strings open object from a file name. Now, just so we have a consistent file name, I'm going to add that up here. Private, actually it's a final Bring file name. So let's write this properly. Data.txt. Now I'm not giving it a like path C / whatever. That's okay because the user doesn't really need to know that this data file exists. So the file name will be opened as a linked list. Okay. If users, this is just an error check, is not equal to null, because that would happen if the file doesn't exist yet. Then I will do all this code, add all the users to the list box. That's assuming that worked, which it doesn't yet, but we'll just kind of see what's going on there. So when the program starts up, it's going to do that. Okay. Now, when I add an existing user, okay, and I move to the next form, now what I'm going to do is, this is move to the main form, is I first need to save all the users to the permanent file. Okay, so that's going to be a little different, right? And I'm going to need to do that whether I'm adding a new user or adding an existing user. Okay, so maybe I'll just do something simple here, right? Add existing, or it's already, anyways. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to do this in 2 different places. So why don't I just make this a method? Save. Okay. So whether I'm adding an existing user, and you could add code here to like select the existing user and then push that name onto the next form, whatever. Or when we add a new user, I'm just putting it, I'm getting it from the text box. Okay, then I'm adding to the linked list, and then I'm also adding to the, and I don't need to do this anymore. I don't need to add it to the list box. That's not a real thing. Okay, because it's immediately going to jump to the next form. So there's no point in doing that. The adding it to the list box would be down here. So I just get the name and add it to the list. Okay, so now let's deal with save. Okay. All right, the video should be back now. Okay, so let's save all these users to the permanent file. This hopefully will be really easy. We're going to call the save object method of our users to our file name. That should literally be it. Okay, time for the test, and then we'll be done. I must have an error in here somewhere. Okay, so I'm going to add walks, and it's immediately going to go, oh, and we cannot find the file. Yeah. Okay, so let's debug this. New linked list. Okay, so just adding that little error check on there. Okay, so it's moved on to the next file. That's great. This is the big test now. When I run this program the second time, oh, it's not in there. Getting an error here. Just going to pause the video for a sec. Yeah, I'm back. If you're going to do permanent file, I forgot about this. There is something you need to do to the linked list. It's really simple. It implements serializable. This is just something you have to do so that the code I wrote will work. You have to do it to your linked list class and your node class. It's what's called a, you should know this from 40S. Serializable is a interface. All right, so let's retest. Bugging a little bit, blocks. This time, there we go. Dave. And the third time, and they're all in there, so it's saving them permanently. All right, I'm going to stop the video there. This will all be available in those resources sections, and hopefully it's helpful for anyone who is working on it.